What's up guys, it's Alex. Today I'm going to talk about the type of games that I like the most as a kind of channel intro so I can start doing some little micro reviews. I would say this video is mostly for me or for future me. I would say you should really only watch this if you're coming from one of my reviews and you want to know where I'm coming from. Basically, I don't think you should care about someone's opinion on a game that they don't like if you don't at least know what they do like. I also don't think you really need to care that much about anyone else's opinion regardless. But yeah, basically, I'll be talking about the type of games I like and what parts of them that I like the most. I'll also talk about at the end how I play games and how I end up rating them. For some context, I have a list of every single game that I've ever played or owned, and I also have a growing list that ranks them all in order. I would say this does make me a little bit insane, but I do love video games, so let's just take a quick look at the top 50. Here it is. Feel free to soak it in. These are some of my absolute favorites. I do currently have my ranking up to like 290, and I think most of them that end up on the ranking list, which is pretty much everything now, most of them are great. It doesn't really get bad until the very end. But yeah, this top section, and even the entire list, is ever-changing, and it's always flexible. For example, here it is from just a few months ago. I'm actually remaking this video because it was way too scripted last time, and I don't have the YouTuber voice. But I'm too lazy to redo the chart for the next section, so you get to see that my list is kind of ever-changing. But basically, I'm going to break down, I think, the 3 qualities that are shared the most by these games. So first of all, I would say what I want is a completable single-player experience. What I mean by that is I like win conditions, and I like to see the credits roll on a game like a nice completed package. I still play multiplayer games, but when it comes to my top picks that I rate the highest, I would say that they're mostly solo experiences. There's definitely some huge exceptions, like I love Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and Spelunky 2 is in my top 10. Next is that they're mostly third-person player character controlled. I like that because I prefer games with fun movement and large movesets, and I just like to see my character move around. I think it's probably easier to give characters fun movement and movesets and even show more personality in third person than it is in other perspectives, so that's most of the reason for my preference. There are other notable exceptions, like shout out to Morrowind and Portal for first person, and I think the only game on this list that isn't a player character controlled game is Balatro, but that game rips, so there's always exceptions. And then third, I love a nice contiguous world, so contiguous connected, where you can go back and forth freely. I would say this is definitely different than just open world. I don't think bigger is always better, but there are huge exceptions here to this one, like the hub-based 3D platformers, Banjo-Kazooie and Mario, or the Pikmin games, which is one of my favorite series. And if you take a look at all 3, I would say most of them apply on this list. Yeah, if you're saying to yourself something like, this just applies to pretty much every game, I disagree. I think there's just such a wide variety of games. I probably just stuck with the same games that you do. I think this is a narrower subset than you do think, but this is a very common type of game as well. Yeah, if I had to put a label on it, it would be something like player character focused, movement based, and goal oriented exploration of interesting worlds, but I don't really want to sound like a video essayist, so I won't talk about that ever again. Another obvious thing is I am a big Nintendo fan with a lot of nostalgia for their slop. So here's a list of all the Nintendo versus not Nintendo. Since I've grown older though, I've been playing a lot of the classics that I missed out on by only having Nintendo systems. That's something I'm always going to encourage. You should get out there and play the old revered classics. Looking at the newer list again, I would say that this just shows that I'm open to most, if not all, genres. Genres you can see here are like action-adventure, which I do think has kind of lost all meaning. Everything in this niche will have that tag. But there's Metroidvanias, 2D, 3D platformers, shooters, roguelikes, RPGs, which I also think has lost some meaning, but when I say RPG, I'm talking about both, Final Fantasy and Morrowind, both types. But more on my list that's not, visible right now is I like puzzle games, tactics games, survival games. The stuff that I'm less likely to be talking about is stuff like Grand Strategy or RTS, and then stuff like simulation and sandbox. But there are always exceptions to that kind of stuff. I've played and sunk hours into multiple simulation sandbox games. The only thing that's not an exception is I will never touch a gacha game. Here's my current top 3 shrine with Metroid, Zelda, Metal Gear. I will always love those series. Also showing my Smash competitor passes just because I fuck with Smash. Alright, moving on to how I play and eventually rank my favorite games. I always start with the context. I'll throw up another warning here, but I think that the context in which you experience a game has a very heavy impact on your experience with it. So what I mean by this is the method of play that you use, how often you play, how much you know about it going in, and even just your current mindset. For example, I would say there's a very big difference in sitting down and playing an 8-hour game all at once versus playing it a few times over the course of a week or even a month. I think playing it all at once will have a very strong impact on how you feel about the game. Other than that, personally, I go in completely blind with no outside resources whenever I play a game. I don't use any save states or guides. I really just like to experience the game as the devs intended. So to start each of these micro reviews, I'll talk about the context first. And after the context, these are kind of the categories that I'll be ranking. I'm not going to actually rate these specifically. These are just the categories I think about when I'm ranking. I think these are all pretty basic. So you have your moment-to-moment gameplay, your level design, your aesthetics, your sound design, your story, your pacing. I will say I don't weigh all these equally. I'm not going to rank a game higher or lower if the story is horrible, if the moment-to-moment gameplay is fantastic. One final warning on screen concerning the replayability category. I do think that the impact or the mental space that a game takes up for you can be just as important as the replayability. For example, if I can look back at a short game and take game design inspiration or appreciate that tight experience, or even just feel some good positive emotion from the game, that can mean more to me than it being long or replayable. But I do also just love, and sometimes even prefer, a nice short replayable game. Third is that I'll just have a space where I speak about some game design goodies and baddies, so these are just moments that I particularly enjoyed or disliked, specifically about the game design, because I like to talk about that. To end my reviews, I'll end with just my overall thoughts on the game, and I'll end up ranking it on my personal list. This doesn't have a lot of context for anyone other than me, because it's my personal list, but I will include other games that are ranked next to it, and I'll include where other games in the series are ranked. I don't like to give out hard number ratings because I think those are pretty pointless. That number is going to be different for any person that likes a different set of games. So I will probably just include recommendations for what type of players should play the game or what type of players might enjoy that game. In conclusion, I like video games a lot. So that's the type of games that I like and the type of reviews that I'll be attempting to make. I might eventually post longer form reviews if I have more to say, but I'm pretty lazy, so probably not. Maybe eventually some other topics like why I don't really like remakes, or maybe I'll stoop down to some classic top 10 slop content, but I'm not really built for that type of content farm shit. Anyways, thanks for watching, goodbye.